They thought I was just background noise, old, harmless, and easy to laugh at, but silence is only powerful when it's the one signing the checks. My name is Chloe. I am 52 years old, and I have spent the last 2 decades working as a simple librarian in a quiet Pennsylvania town, tucked away from the prying eyes of a family that considers me a financial failure. I was standing in the corner of a crystal-lit ballroom tonight, wearing a dress from a department store sale, when my nephew Austin grabbed the microphone during his own engagement party to deliver a toast that didn't celebrate love, but rather his own perceived superiority. He pointed a finger at me in front of 200 wealthy guests and called me a useless cat, a stray that his mother Vanessa had been forced to feed out of pity, while I contributed nothing but my presence to their prestigious lineage. The room erupted in a cruel, sophisticated laughter that cut deeper than any blade, but I didn't flinch or wipe away a single tear because I knew something Austin didn't. I am the sole owner of Vanguard Synergy, the venture capital firm that just approved the 7-figure loan, keeping his failing tech company and this entire lavish party afloat. Before I tell you how I turned his public insult into the moment his empire began to crumble, please tell me what time it is and which city you are watching from, so I can see how far my story has traveled. If you believe that respect should be earned and that arrogance always pays a heavy price, please hit the like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to this channel to support the truth. To understand why I remained a statue of ice while the laughter of my own blood echoed through that ballroom, you have to look back at the winter 5 years ago when the world decided I was invisible. My husband David had just passed away, leaving me with a modest house and a heavy silence that my younger sister Vanessa interpreted as an invitation to treat me like a charity case. She showed up at my door not with comfort, but with a box of her old, stained clothes and a lecture about how my life as a librarian was a dead end that would eventually lead me to her doorstep begging for scraps. Vanessa had always been the loud one, the sister who married a man with a flashy car and an even flashier debt, yet she carried herself as if she were royalty presiding over a peasant. What she and her son Austin never bothered to learn was that David was a brilliant, albeit reclusive, quantitative analyst who had spent 30 years building a private investment algorithm that functioned like a digital gold mine. When he died, he didn't just leave me a house. He left me the keys to a financial engine so powerful it could shift markets, provided it was handled with the same quiet discipline we had practiced our entire marriage. I took that inheritance and founded Vanguard Synergy under a complex web of anonymous trusts and legal firewalls managed by my attorney, Mr. Sterling, ensuring that my name was never associated with the billions we were beginning to move. I chose to stay in my small house and keep my job at the library because I found peace in the stacks of books and the simplicity of a life where people didn't want anything from me except a stamp on a return card. Meanwhile, Vanessa spent the next few years bragging about Austin's supposed genius as he launched a series of tech startups that were little more than empty offices and expensive marketing campaigns funded by credit cards. They viewed my frugal lifestyle as proof of my poverty, often making me sit at the kids' table during holiday dinners, or forgetting to invite me to events where their high society friends might be embarrassed by my presence. Austin grew into a man who measured worth by the brand of his watch and the followers on his social media, never realizing that the very venture capital firms he was pitching were subsidiaries of my parent company. He saw me as a useless cat because I didn't preen or hiss or demand attention, failing to realize that a cat in the shadows sees everything and moves with a precision that the loud, barking dogs can never comprehend. I watched from the sidelines as he burned through his parents' savings and began looking for a lifeline, his arrogance blinded to the fact that the hand he was about to bite was the only one that could keep him from drowning. My lawyer Sterling warned me that Austin's latest firm was a disaster of mismanagement and ego, but I authorized a preliminary bridge loan of $900,000 just to see if a taste of success would bring out any shred of humility in my nephew. Instead, it only amplified his cruelty, convincing him that he was a self-made titan who had no further use for an impoverished ant. I spent my nights reviewing his balance sheets, which were riddled with personal expenses disguised as business costs, and realized that my family wasn't just ungrateful, they were predatory. The librarian they mocked was actually the gatekeeper of their entire reality, holding a ledger that documented every lie and every cent of the money they were currently using to look down upon me from their pedestals of debt. The tension within our family had reached a boiling point long before the engagement party ever began, fueled by Vanessa's relentless obsession with my modest property. She started calling me at the library twice a day, her voice shifting from a fake, sugary concern to a sharp, demanding tone as she insisted that I sell my house and move into a managed care facility. She claimed that the money from the sale should go into a family trust managed by Austin, arguing that since I had no children of my own, my assets were essentially wasted on my quiet existence. I sat in my small office surrounded by the scent of old paper, listening to her explain how Austin needed the liquidity to secure his future with Brooke, the daughter of a real estate mogul whose family expected a certain level of financial prestige. It became clear that Austin had lied to Brooke's father about his net worth, and he was now counting on my house as his final piece of collateral to maintain the illusion of wealth. I found out through Mr. Sterling that Austin had even gone as far as to draft a power of attorney document with my forged signature, attempting to bypass my consent entirely to gain control over my bank accounts. He didn't know that my primary accounts were locked behind a multi-factor authorization system that required biometric data he could never replicate, leaving him frustrated and increasingly desperate. When I refused to sign their voluntary transfer papers during a tense Sunday lunch, Austin threw his napkin on the table and told me that my stubbornness was a cancer on his career. He called me an anchor, dragging down the family's potential, while Vanessa nodded in agreement, claiming that my husband David would be ashamed of how I was hoarding a house I didn't need. They didn't see the irony of calling me a hoarder, while they were actively trying to steal the only physical memory I had left of my marriage. A week later, I discovered that Austin had used my Social Security number to open a secondary line of credit for his company, a move that was not just immoral, but a federal crime that could land him in prison for years. I could have called the police right then, but I wanted to see how deep the rabbit hole of their entitlement went before I closed the door on them forever. I watched as Austin purchased a $25,000 engagement ring using that fraudulent credit line, presenting it to Brooke as if it were a trophy of his own success. He invited me to the engagement party not because he wanted me there, but because he wanted Brooke's father to see that he had a charity case relative he was kindly supporting, a prop to bolster his image as a compassionate leader. Vanessa even sent me a list of appropriate clothing to wear, suggesting a drab gray suit that she had found at a thrift store, making sure I wouldn't outshine the expensive silk she intended to wear. They were so busy choreographing their fake lives that they never noticed Mr. Sterling's name on the list of VIP investors Austin was desperately trying to impress. Every time Austin spoke about his visionary leadership, I thought about the forged documents sitting in a secure safe at my lawyer's office, a ticking time bomb that I was prepared to detonate the moment they crossed the final line. They had mistaken my patience for a lack of options, and my silence for a lack of intelligence, preparing a stage where they intended to humiliate me. I drove my 10-year-old sedan to the hotel that night, parking it among the Ferraris and Porsches, knowing that by the end of the week, those luxury cars would be the only things Austin had left to his name before the repo men arrived. The Tuesday morning before the engagement party brought an urgent email from Mr. Sterling that confirmed my worst fears about Austin's business ethics. He had discovered that my nephew wasn't just mismanaging the $900,000 bridge loan I had authorized through the anonymous trust. He was actively funneling those funds into a private offshore account to pay for a secret penthouse in Miami. Austin was gambling with my money, betting that he could secure a massive merger with Brooke's father's firm before the auditors noticed the missing capital. He was a house of cards built on a foundation of stolen credit and forged signatures, yet he walked through the world with the confidence of a king. I sat at my library desk, looking at the digital trail of his greed, and realized that my family's betrayal wasn't just a series of insults, it was a coordinated financial assault. I instructed Sterling to prepare an immediate notice of default and a cease and desist order, but told him to hold the delivery until Friday morning, the day after the engagement party. I wanted Austin to have his night of glory, to feel the weight of the crown he had stolen before the entire world saw it turn to ash. I also discovered that Vanessa had been promising Brooke's mother that I would serve as a live-in nanny for Brooke's future children, essentially volunteering me for a life of domestic servitude to pay back the debts they claimed I owed the family. They were selling my future to buy their own social status, treating me like a piece of equipment they could trade at a pawn shop. I spent that afternoon in a quiet meeting with a private investigator who had been tracking Austin's movements and he handed me a folder containing photographs of Austin meeting with a competitor to leak Brooke's father's trade secrets in exchange for a kickback. My nephew was a double agent of his own destruction, betraying the very woman he claimed to love and the family he was trying to join. I felt a cold, sharp clarity as I reviewed the evidence, knowing that I wasn't just protecting my money anymore. I was protecting my husband's legacy from being used to fund a criminal enterprise. I bought a small, elegant piece of jewelry for myself that day, a simple pearl necklace that cost more than Austin's entire car, and hid it in my purse, a private reminder of who I really was. When Vanessa called me that evening to remind me to stay out of the way during the party, I simply told her that I wouldn't miss the event for anything in the world. She laughed and said it was good that I finally understood my place, assuming I was grateful for the invitation to witness their triumph. I spent the night before the party looking through old photos of David, remembering how he always told me that the loudest person in the room is usually the most fragile. I realized then that Austin's need to humiliate me was actually a symptom of his own fear, a desperate attempt to feel powerful because he knew deep down that he was a fraud. I prepared a special gift for the couple, a beautifully wrapped box that contained nothing but a copy of the original trust agreement for Vanguard Synergy, hidden under a layer of expensive tissue paper. I wouldn't give it to them during the party, but I kept it in my car as a symbolic anchor for the events to come. I was no longer a bystander in my own life. I was the hand that was about to pull the lever on the trap they had so carefully constructed. I went to bed that night feeling a strange sense of peace, the kind that only comes when you know exactly how a story is going to end while everyone else is still guessing the plot. The crystal chandeliers at the Grandview Hotel reflected a level of luxury that was as hollow as the smiles of the people standing beneath them. I walked into the ballroom 30 minutes after the start time, wearing the drab gray suit Vanessa had chosen for me, blending into the shadows of the ornate pillars while the elite of Pennsylvania sipped champagne that cost more than my monthly mortgage. Austin was at the center of the room, surrounded by Brooke's family and several local politicians, gesturing wildly as he told a story about his unprecedented growth in the tech sector. Brooke looked like a mannequin in her designer gown, her eyes constantly scanning the room for anyone more important than the person she was currently speaking to. When Vanessa saw me, she scurried over not to greet me, but to tell me to go stand near the buffet table and try not to look so depressed. She told me that Brooke's father, Mr. Sterling, not realizing my attorney shared the same surname as a prominent local family, was looking for investors, and that I should stay out of sight so I wouldn't ruin Austin's chances. I watched as Austin took the stage, his face flushed with the arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. He began his speech by thanking Brooke's family for their visionary support, and then he pivoted to a topic that silenced the room. He spoke about the importance of family, but his words were laced with a poisonous sarcasm that made my skin crawl. He looked directly at me, the light hitting his expensive watch, and began the useless cat speech that he thought would be his crowning comedic moment. He told the crowd that every successful family has a member who is a parasite, a creature that takes and takes without ever offering a drop of value in return. He laughed as he described me as a librarian who lived in a house David had wasted on me, claiming that I was lucky he was there to manage my affairs so I wouldn't end up on the street. The laughter that followed was a collective snicker of the wealthy, a sound of people who enjoyed seeing someone they deemed lesser than themselves being put in their place. I saw Brooke whisper something to her mother while pointing at my shoes, both of them sharing a smirk that told me they had already planned my exit from the family. I didn't say a word, even when Austin suggested that I should be grateful he was allowing me to eat the leftovers from the catering staff. I stood there, a quiet gray figure in a sea of silk and gold, and felt the final thread of my loyalty to my sister's son snap. I saw my lawyer, the real Mr. Sterling, standing near the bar with a glass of mineral water, his eyes meeting mine for a split second. He gave me a nearly imperceptible nod, confirming that the cease and desist and the default orders were ready for the morning. Austin ended his speech by raising his glass to a future without anchors, a blatant reference to his plan to sell my house and move me out of his life. I took a single sip of water and felt a surge of adrenaline, knowing that the man on the stage was currently celebrating his own funeral. He thought he was the lion of the ballroom, but he was just a puppet whose strings I was about to cut with a single phone call. The humiliation he intended for me was actually the final piece of evidence I needed to proceed with the full weight of the law. I walked out of the ballroom before the dessert was served, the echoes of their laughter following me into the cool night air of the parking lot. 48 hours after the echoes of that cruel laughter died down, Austin walked into the executive boardroom of Vanguard Synergy with a swagger that suggested he already owned the building. He was wearing his luckiest suit, flanked by a nervous-looking Vanessa and an expectant Brooke, all of them believing they were there to sign the final documents for a $10 million Series A investment. Austin had told Brooke's father that this meeting was the formality that would make him a billionaire, and he had even invited a small photography crew to capture the historic moment of his success. They were led into the room by a receptionist who didn't smile, and they took their seats at a massive mahogany table that looked out over the skyline of the city. Mr. Sterling sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of professional neutrality as he laid out several thick folders of legal documents. Austin didn't even read them. He just reached for a gold-plated pen and joked about how easy the world of high finance was once you had the right connections. He actually said out loud that he couldn't wait to see the look on his poor aunt's face when he bought her house just to tear it down and build a pool. That was the moment I decided to walk through the double doors. I wasn't wearing the gray thrift store suit this time. I was in a tailored navy blue blazer with the pearl necklace I had bought for myself, my hair pulled back in a sharp, professional style that commanded the room. The silence that hit the group was so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the boardroom. Austin's pen froze an inch above the signature line, his mouth hanging open like a fish out of water. Vanessa stood up so quickly her chair nearly toppled over, her face turning a ghostly shade of white as she stammered my name. I didn't look at her. I walked straight to the empty chair next to Mr. Sterling, and he stood up with a respectful bow that made Brooke's jaw drop. Sterling introduced me to the room not as their aunt, but as Chloe Enuan, the founder, CEO, and sole owner of Vanguard Synergy and all its subsidiaries. I sat down and pulled a folder from my briefcase, not the investment contract Austin was expecting, but the notice of immediate recall for the $900,000 bridge loan. I told the room, my voice calm and steady, that after a thorough audit of Austin's company, we had found significant evidence of embezzlement, personal expense, fraud, and the illegal use of a family member's social security number. I watched as Austin's confidence evaporated, replaced by a frantic, sweating panic that made him look small and pathetic in his expensive suit. I informed him that not only was the $10 million investment canceled, but that Vanguard was moving to seize his company's assets and his personal bank accounts to recover the stolen bridge loan. Vanessa tried to scream that I couldn't do this to family, but I reminded her that family doesn't forge signatures or call their elders useless cats in front of a crowd of strangers. Brooke looked from Austin to me, her eyes filling with a cold realization that the man she was about to marry was a bankrupt fraud. She didn't stay to comfort him. She grabbed her designer purse and walked out of the room without a single word, leaving Austin to face the consequences of his own ego. The photographers he had hired stood there awkwardly until I signaled for them to leave, their cameras capturing the exact moment Austin's world collapsed. He tried to beg, his voice cracking as he called me Aunt Chloe, but I told him that Chloe was no longer in the building, only the CEO remained. I handed the file to Mr. Sterling and instructed him to contact the district attorney's office regarding the identity theft and financial fraud. The librarian they thought was a harmless stray had just dismantled their entire reality with a few sheets of paper and a lifetime of hidden grit. The news of the bridge loan recall and the subsequent fraud investigation ripped through the local business community like a wildfire, leaving Austin's reputation in a heap of smoldering ash. By the following Monday, Brooke's father had not only officially canceled the merger, but had also filed a lawsuit against Austin for misrepresentation and the attempted leak of trade secrets. Brooke herself sent a courier to Austin's apartment with a box containing his belongings and a note stating that the engagement was over and the ring, which she now knew was bought with stolen credit, had been turned over to the authorities as evidence. Vanessa was hit the hardest, as she had signed a personal guarantee for Austin's office lease, a document she hadn't bothered to read when her son told her it was just a formality. Since Austin had no assets left to seize, the landlord moved to garnish Vanessa's bank accounts and place a lien on the luxury car she had been bragging about for months. She called me 30 times that day, her messages shifting from hysterical crying to vicious threats, accusing me of being a monster who hated her own sister. I didn't answer a single call. I simply forwarded the transcripts of her messages to Mr. Sterling to be added to the harassment file we were building. I went to the library as usual, shelving books and helping students with their research, feeling a profound sense of relief that the mask of the poor relative had finally been removed. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was simply choosing who I wanted to be in a world that finally knew I had teeth. Austin was forced to move back into his mother's guest room after his penthouse and his car were repossessed, but even that didn't last long. The bank initiated foreclosure on Vanessa's house because the mortgage hadn't been paid in 4 months. Austin had been taking the money she gave him for the bills and using it to fund his Miami lifestyle. They were both facing the reality of the poverty they had once mocked me for, but unlike me, they had no skills, no resilience, and no integrity to fall back on. Mr. Sterling informed me that the district attorney was moving forward with charges of aggravated identity theft against Austin, a crime that carried a mandatory minimum sentence in our state. Vanessa tried to come to my house one last time, pounding on the door and screaming about family blood, but I had already installed a high-end security system and a private guard. I watched her on the monitor as she sat on my porch and cried, not out of remorse for what she did to me, but out of fear for the life of comfort she was losing. I realized then that she had never actually loved me. She had only loved the version of me that she could control and feel superior to. I took a deep breath of the cool Pennsylvania air and felt the weight of 30 years of their expectations finally lift off my shoulders. I was no longer the anchor of their family, and I was certainly no longer their useless cat. I was the survivor who had outplayed them at their own game. I spent that evening drafting a plan to move the headquarters of Vanguard Synergy to Vermont, a place where I could build a new life far away from the toxic remnants of my past. I wasn't just moving my company. I was moving my soul to a place where it could finally breathe without the suffocating pressure of their greed. Austin and Vanessa had thought they were the architects of my misery, but they had actually been the builders of their own prison, and I was simply the one who turned the key. The $50 million I had earned through my own intelligence and David's legacy was now completely shielded, and for the first time in my life, I felt like the master of my own destiny. The air in the Green Mountains of Vermont is crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the ballroom where I was once called a useless cat. I am standing on the deck of my new home, a place of wood and glass that overlooks a valley of pine trees, a sanctuary that Vanessa and Austin will never be able to reach or ruin. Eventually, I decided to sell my house in Pennsylvania, but I didn't let a developer tear it down. Instead, I donated it to a local nonprofit that provides housing for widows who have been financially abused by their families. It felt like the right way to honor David's memory by turning our home into a fortress for women who are currently standing where I once stood. Austin is currently serving a 4-year sentence in a federal correctional facility for financial fraud and identity theft, his dreams of being a tech mogul replaced by the gray reality of a prison library where he is finally learning the value of a book. Vanessa is living in a small, 1-bedroom apartment on the other side of the state, working a retail job she despises and complaining to anyone who will listen about the betrayal of her sister. She still doesn't understand that I didn't destroy her life. I simply stopped holding it together for her while she was busy trying to dismantle mine. This journey has taught me a lesson that I hope stays with you long after this video ends. Never mistake a person's quietness for a lack of power, and never assume that someone's kindness is a sign of their weakness. I learned that the word family is often used as a cage to keep you small, a way to make you feel guilty for having boundaries that protect your own hard-earned peace. For decades, I let them define my worth based on what I could give them, but I realize now that my true value was always in the strength I had to walk away and let them face the consequences of their own actions. To everyone watching, I want you to know that your silence is a resource, and your work is a legacy that belongs to you and no one else. Do not let the loud, entitled voices in your life convince you to hand over the keys to your future. If you are in a situation where you are being mocked or undervalued by those who should be your biggest supporters, remember that you have the power to be the architect of your own justice, just like I was. I chose to fight back with the truth and the law instead of anger and screams, and the result is a freedom that is more valuable than any bank account balance. Your likes, your comments, and your subscriptions are what help these stories of justice reach the people who are still suffering in silence, giving them the hope that they too can find their way out. Before I go, I want to ask you a question that I had to answer for myself. What would you do if you realized that the people you were trying to save were actually the ones trying to sink you? Please share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. I read every one of them, and your courage to speak up is what keeps this community growing. I am Chloe, and I am no longer the librarian hiding in the stacks or the ant being used as a prop for a fraud's ego. I am a woman who found her voice in the silence and her power in the truth. The ledgers are closed, the debt has been paid in full, and for the first time, the quiet is exactly how I want it to be. Thank you for listening, for standing with me, and for believing that justice, though it may be silent, is never truly absent. Always remember to trust yourself, guard your boundaries, and never let anyone call you useless just because they can't see the fire you're carrying inside. Goodbye for now, and may you find the courage to protect the life you've worked so hard to build. Total word count, 4,755 words.